Welcome to the deep dive. It feels like ESG and sustainability are just, well, everywhere these days. You hear them in the news and business reports, maybe even popping up in everyday conversations. But how often do we actually stop and, understand what they really mean, beyond just being buzzwords? Today we're doing a deep dive into this really comprehensive presentation titled ESG and Sustainability, Beyond Buzzwords, Understanding Real Applications. Our mission for you is to kind of peel back the layers of jargon, give you some practical, actionable insights into what these concepts truly represent, why they're so incredibly important right now, and how they're fundamentally reshaping, well, the whole world of business and investment. We're really going to try and unpack the genuine impact and applications of sustainability practices. Okay, so let's get into this. This topic, it impacts everyone, doesn't it? Whether you're leading a company, investing your savings, or maybe you're just curious about the future of our planet and, society.
Absolutely. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that the urgency, the agency to address ESG factors has never felt more pronounced. Think about it. We're seeing accelerating climate change, unfortunately amplified social inequalities, and corporate scandals that just keep highlighting these governance failures. Stakeholders, from employees to customers to investors, they're not just asking anymore, they're demanding authentic action, not just words. This isn't theoretical anymore. It's really about how today's business leaders navigate this unprecedented pressure while still, being expected to deliver financial performance. It's a complex balancing act for sure.
That's a great point about the pressure. So maybe let's start at the beginning. How did we even get here to a place where ESG is such a central theme in business? What's the sort of historical journey?
Yeah, it's a really interesting evolution, actually. If you look back, say, to the 1950s and 70s, corporate responsibility was mostly peripheral. Think charitable donations, almost like an afterthought. Then, maybe by the 80s and 90s, it matured a bit into corporate social responsibility, CSR, often seen more as a way for companies to manage their reputation, doing good for PR.
Okay, so a bit more strategic than just charity, maybe, but still kind of separate from the main business.
Exactly, still often siloed. Then in the 2000s, the focus shifted pretty strongly to sustainability, primarily emphasizing environmental impacts like reducing a company's carbon footprint. And then finally, from about 2010 onwards, maybe to the present, we've seen this much fuller integration. ESG becoming part of core business strategy directly linked to financial performance. It's not just about doing good anymore. It's really about being a resilient, profitable business because you're considering these factors.
That shift, wow, from nice to have to must have, that's pretty significant. And speaking of ESG, these letters get thrown around a lot. ESG. Could you break down what each one truly represents? Environmental, social, and governance.
Absolutely. Yeah, think of it like 3 pillars, maybe. E for environmental. That looks at how a company interacts with the natural world. Okay.
So things like its climate impact, energy use, waste management, pollution prevention, are they actually reducing emissions, conserving water, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. And the S, social.
Right, S for social.
Yeah.
This is all about how a company manages relationships with people. And it's broad. It covers employee well-being, diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, even community engagement.
Just how they treat people, basically.
Exactly. Are employees treated fairly? Is the supply chain ethical? It's often talked about as a company's social license to operate.
Okay, so not just what you make, but how you make it and how you treat everyone involved. And finally, the G for governance. What's that about?
G for governance. You could argue this is the backbone, really. It's about how a company is led and operated. So things like board composition, diversity on the board, executive compensation, transparency, shareholder rights. Essentially, it's the whole system of practices and procedures guiding how a company is directed and controlled.
And strong governance, well, it helps ensure that the E and S factors are genuinely integrated, that they're not just, window dressing.
That makes a lot of sense. And it clarifies something I often hear. People sometimes use sustainability and ESG interchangeably. Are they the same thing?
Good question. Not quite, no. Think of sustainability as the bigger picture, the broader, overarching philosophy, or maybe the grand goal. It's about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That classic definition.
It's a guiding principle.
Exactly. ESG, on the other hand, provides the specific framework. The metrics, the disclosures. It's more the practical tool set used primarily by investors and regulators to actually measure progress towards that broader sustainability goal.
Interesting. So sustainability is maybe the why, and ESG is the how you measure and report on that why.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's talk about the bottom line. Because for any business, that question always comes up, right? Profitability. What's the compelling business case for integrating ESG? Does it actually pay off?
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The data is becoming increasingly clear. Companies with strong ESG profiles, they often outperform their peers financially.
Really?
Yeah. They tend to show lower volatility, better risk-adjusted returns, and can even access capital at a lower cost sometimes.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a claim. How does that actually happen? What are the mechanisms?
Well, there are several ways it plays out. Strong ESG practices can drive innovation, maybe leading to new sustainable products or more efficient processes. They definitely mitigate risks. Think regulatory fines, supply chain disruptions, or, reputational damage from scandals.
Sure.
They also tend to become magnets for talent. People, especially younger generations, they really want to work for companies that align with their values.
That makes sense.
And crucially, it builds stakeholder trust with customers, communities, investors, which is just invaluable. Look, we're seeing undeniable growth in sustainable investing globally. A huge percentage of global assets now incorporate ESG criteria in some way, and you have major players like BlackRock, for example, making ESG central to their investment processes.
So it's really moving from just doing good to actually doing good business.
Yeah, that leads me to some common misconceptions, though. I often hear people say, oh, ESG, that's just about environmental issues, or maybe it means sacrificing financial returns. How do we address those?
Yeah, those are definitely common myths we hear all the time. First, as we just discussed, ESG is a three-legged stool: environmental, social, and governance. It's much broader than just climate or environment.
Right.
Second, and this is really crucial, the evidence shows that it absolutely does not necessarily mean sacrificing financial returns. In fact, as we just highlighted, it often enhances them, especially over the long term.
Okay. And is it just for the huge multinational corporations? What about smaller businesses? Another great point, another misconception. No, ESG is relevant for organizations of all sizes. Sure, the scale of implementation might differ, but the core principles, good environmental stewardship, responsible social practices, sound governance, they apply universally. And it's not just a Western luxury concern either. We're seeing emerging markets increasingly adopt and even lead in certain ESG areas. This is really a global movement.
That's good to hear. It's not just for the giants. And, to make this even more tangible for our listener, can you share some real-world examples? Companies that are truly leading the charge, not just, talking the talk.
Absolutely. Happy to. Think about Unilever. Their sustainable living plan was huge. They consciously linked growth with reducing their environmental footprint and increasing positive social impact.
Yeah, I remember that.
Or Microsoft. They've committed to being carbon negative by 2030, not just neutral, negative, meaning they plan to remove more carbon than they emit. Then there's Patagonia, obviously a pioneer in the B Corp movement. They've deeply embedded social and environmental responsibility into their entire business model, like from day one almost. And a really fascinating transformation story is Rensted, the Danish energy company. They went from being heavily reliant on fossil fuels to becoming a global leader in offshore wind power. A massive shift.
Right.
These aren't just like one-off projects. These are examples of core business transformations.
Those are powerful examples.
Yeah.
But look, it can't all be smooth sailing, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges companies face when they actually try to implement these ESG strategies? I imagine measurement is a big one.
You're spot on. Measurement is definitely a challenge. Just grappling with data availability, for starters, ensuring consistency across different metrics, verifying the information, it can be complex.
Yeah.
However, we are seeing significant advancements now. There are standardization efforts underway, and new technological solutions are emerging to help companies collect and analyze this data more effectively.
And what about all the different reporting frameworks? It feels like an alphabet soup out there sometimes. GRI, SSB, TCFD.
It can definitely feel that way, like learning a new language. But they often serve slightly different purposes. You have frameworks like GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, which is quite broad and focuses on a company's impact on all stakeholders.
Okay.
Then there's SSB Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which focuses more on financially material ESG issues, stuff relevant specifically to investors.
Right, the money angle.
Yeah. TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, focuses specifically on climate risks and opportunities. And the newer ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, is really aiming to create a global baseline for sustainability reporting, which should help simplify things eventually.
Hopefully.
A key concept here, though, is materiality assessments. It's basically about identifying which ESG issues are most significant, most material to a specific company's financial performance and its wider impact. It's like a compass pointing to what truly matters for their business.
That helps clarify the landscape a bit, thanks. And sticking with the E for a moment on the climate front, understanding carbon emissions seems critical. We hear terms like Scope 1, 2, and 3 all the time. Can you demystify those for us?
Sure. Yeah, it's helpful to think of carbon emissions in these three categories. Scope 1. These are the direct emissions. From sources owned or controlled by the company itself, think emissions from their own factories or their company vehicles.
Okay, direct stuff.
Scope 2. These are indirect emissions, specifically from the generation of purchased energy, so the electricity, heating, or cooling that a company buys.
Got it. Purchased energy.
And Scope 3. This is often the largest and, frankly, the most complex category. It encompasses all other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain.
The whole chain.
The whole chain. From the raw materials they buy, supplier activities, employee commuting, business travel, all the way to the end-of-life treatment of their sold products. So a truly comprehensive carbon footprint requires measuring all three scopes.
Wow, that Scope 3 sounds like a massive undertaking. It covers pretty much everything a company touches upstream and downstream. And with all this talk of climate targets, net zero commitments, how can we tell if a company's commitment is real and not just, well, greenwashing?
That's a critical question, and you're right to ask it. Credible net zero commitments really require science-based targets. That means targets align with what climate science tells us is necessary to limit global warming, usually to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Okay, based on the science.
Exactly. And they need transparent reporting of progress against those targets. Interim milestones, not just a vague promise for 2050. This is absolutely essential to avoid greenwashing, which is basically making unsubstantiated or misleading claims about your environmental performance. And regulators are watching. We've actually seen something like a 300% increase in regulatory actions against greenwashing globally in recent times.
300%, wow.
Yeah, so it's a very real risk for companies if they're not authentic about their claims.
That's a huge jump. It seems regulators are definitely cracking down then. Okay. Moving beyond the environmental side for a moment, let's circle back to the social aspect, the S. You mentioned it's more than just diversity statistics, right?
Absolutely. While diversity numbers, representation are important metrics, yes, the social dimension delves much deeper. It gets into concepts like belonging, psychological safety, human capital development, fair labor practices, community impact. And it also really extends to due diligence within the supply chain, making sure your suppliers are meeting standards too.
Right.
This is becoming increasingly regulated, by the way. For example, the EU has the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It's a significant piece of legislation requiring companies to actively identify and address human rights and environmental impacts throughout their entire value chain.
So it's about making sure your whole ecosystem basically is operating ethically.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, none of this works without solid governance. How does the G tie all this together?
Yeah, effective governance. It really is critical for authentic ESG performance. It's the underpinning. You need that board-level oversight, clear executive accountability. It's the mechanism that ensures these environmental and social commitments are truly integrated into the business strategy, not just sitting off to the side in a sustainability department.
Right. Integrated, not siloed.
Exactly. And it's becoming so important that, get this, something like 73% of S&P 500 companies now include ESG metrics in their executive compensation plans.
Seriously. Tied to bonuses.
Tied to bonuses, yes. So leadership's pay is linked, at least in part, to hitting certain ESG targets. That's a pretty powerful incentive, wouldn't you say?
That really signals how seriously companies are starting to take this, or have to take this. Okay, we've talked about a lot of concepts, challenges. How do companies actually mature in their ESG journey? Is there like a typical path they follow?
Yeah, you can often see companies moving through a kind of maturity model. It's not always linear, but there's a pattern. It often starts with just reactive compliance, doing the bare minimum, what's legally required.
Checking boxes.
Pretty much. Then it might progress to more proactive risk management, identifying potential ESG risks and trying to mitigate them before they cause problems. From there, hopefully, it moves into value creation, where companies start seeing ESG not just as a risk, but as an opportunity to innovate, to differentiate, to attract customers and talent. And ultimately, the most advanced organizations, they reach a stage of what you might call purpose-driven transformation, where sustainability is truly embedded into their core strategy, their operations, their culture. It's just how they do business.
That makes sense, moving from obligation to opportunity to essentially identity. And from an investor's perspective, looking at all this, what ESG metrics are they really prioritizing right now? What do they want to see?
Investors are definitely looking for tangible data, hard numbers where possible. Common priorities include things like greenhouse gas emissions, Scope 1, 2, and increasingly Scope 3, workforce diversity metrics, employee retention rates, board effectiveness, independence, executive pay alignment, supply chain management practices.
So concrete things.
Concrete things that they believe impact long-term value creation and risk management. And of course, they're also watching the regulatory landscape very closely. It's evolving rapidly, especially in places like the EU with the taxonomy regulation, which defines what actually counts as a sustainable economic activity. And in the US, the SEC's climate disclosure rule, though facing challenges, is pushing for more standardized reporting. It's a moving target, so staying informed is absolutely key.
It sounds like a constant learning curve.
Yeah.
How are digital solutions playing a role in managing all this complexity? Is technology helping?
Oh, absolutely. Digital solutions are really transforming sustainability management massively. Think about specialized ESG data management platforms. They help companies collect, aggregate, and analyze all this complex information from different sources. You've got remote sensing and IoT devices for monitoring environmental impacts in real time. AI is being used to identify trends, predict risks, even optimize resource use. And there's even interest in using blockchain for enhancing supply chain transparency and traceability. These tools are making it much easier for companies to track, report, and ultimately improve their ESG performance.
That's fascinating how tech is converging with sustainability needs. Really powerful. We've covered a lot. But before we wrap up, maybe touch on how ESG priorities might vary across different industries. And also, back to the smaller businesses point, can they really make a difference? Is it feasible for them?
Good question. Yes, ESG priorities definitely vary by sector. It's not one size fits all. For, say, heavy industry or manufacturing, decarbonization and energy efficiency are often huge priorities, reducing those Scope 1 and 2 emissions.
Makes sense.
For financial services, a big focus is often on financed emissions, the carbon footprint associated with their lending and investment portfolios. Where is their money going? For tech companies, issues like data privacy, cybersecurity, ethical AI, and managing e-waste might be paramount.
Right. Different risks and impacts.
Exactly. As for small and medium enterprises, SMEs, they absolutely can make a difference. And yes, it's feasible. The key is often to focus. Focus on the ESG issues that are most material specifically to their business and their stakeholders. They can leverage industry associations for guidance, maybe pool resources, and sometimes it's best to start with some early wins, maybe in areas like energy efficiency, waste reduction, or positive local community engagement, things that are tangible and achievable. It's about scaling the approach, not necessarily doing everything at once.
So it's adaptable, not a rigid checklist, but principles that can be applied appropriately. And we briefly touched on the cost earlier, but let's just revisit the actual financial returns on sustainability. Is the investment worth it?
Yeah, it's true. Implementing meaningful ESG programs does require investment. Time, resources, sometimes capital expenditure. But the returns, increasingly, are seen as significant and multifaceted. We're talking potential cost savings, for example, from reduced energy consumption or less waste going to landfill.
Okay, efficiency gains?
Exactly. Increased revenue opportunities through access to new markets or developing innovative, sustainable product lines that customers want. And as we mentioned, a massive boost potentially in talent attraction and retention. Good people want to work for good companies. Companies with strong, authentic ESG performance are simply becoming more attractive to top talent and also to customers.
You know, that makes perfect sense, especially when you look at consumer and employee expectations today. I think I saw a stat somewhere. Like 78% of consumers prefer companies with strong environmental commitments. And something like 76% of millennials actually consider a company's social and environmental commitments when deciding where to work. That's a huge driver right there.
It really is. Those expectations are shifting the landscape dramatically.
And how is green finance, fitting into this picture? Is the money flowing?
Yes, green finance is basically the engine providing the capital to fuel this transition. You have instruments like sustainability-linked loans, for instance. The interest rate on the loan can actually adjust based on whether the company meets certain pre-agreed ESG targets.
Well, interesting.
Yeah. Or green bonds, which raise capital specifically to fund environmentally beneficial projects like renewable energy or green buildings. Basically, capital is increasingly flowing towards sustainable initiatives, and these financial instruments offer tangible benefits for companies demonstrating strong ESG performance. It helps create a kind of virtuous cycle.
Wow. Okay. What a deep dive that was. Seriously, we've journeyed from understanding the historical evolution of corporate responsibility all the way to the granular definitions of environmental, social, and governance factors, ES and G. We've explored the really compelling business case for ESG, debunked some common misconceptions,
Mm.
and looked at those incredible real-world examples of companies that seem to be genuinely leading the charge.
We really have. And we've also grappled with some complex topics, haven't we? Like the challenges around measurement, the risks of greenwashing, and seeing how the regulatory landscape and digital solutions are rapidly evolving. We even considered how ESG adapts for different industries and, importantly, for smaller businesses too. And yeah, underscored the significant financial returns it can potentially offer. What really stands out to me, though, is just how powerfully consumer and employee expectations are driving this whole shift.
Mhm.
And as you just mentioned, how green finance is providing the necessary capital to make it happen.
So when you boil it all down, what does this all mean for you listening? It seems clear that ESG isn't just some separate initiative anymore. It's not a side project. It's becoming a fundamental lens through which to view pretty much all business decisions today. It's about building resilience, mitigating risk, and ultimately creating value that extends far beyond just the traditional bottom line, beyond just profit.
That's a great summary. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, authentic ESG integration, it really is a journey. It's not a static destination you just arrive at. It requires continuous improvement, adaptation, constant innovation. The organizations having the most impact are those embedding sustainability right into their core strategy, their daily operations, their company culture. And remember, you can start where you are, leverage what you have, build momentum through some early tangible wins. Which maybe raises an important question for you, our listener. How can you apply some of these insights, whether you're a student, a professional, or just, a curious individual? How can you use this to better understand the decisions companies are making all around you every day?
That is a powerful question to consider. Definitely food for thought. And as we look to the future, thinking about these emerging trends like uh, planetary boundaries, this idea that there are fundamental limits to what our Earth systems can sustain, or regenerative business models, which aim not just to reduce harm, but actually restore ecosystems and communities, and the explosion of real-time ESG data becoming available. Maybe consider this. How might the very concept of value itself continue to evolve, moving beyond purely financial metrics, important as they are, to truly encompass our collective impact on people and the planet? It's a pretty profound thought to mull over until our next deep dive.